I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Bruce Katz. Bruce J. Katz is a vice president at the Brookings Institution and founding director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program. He is also co-author of The Metropolitan Revolution, a distillation of his work on the emerging metropolitan-led next economy and its practitioners around the country working to produce more and better jobs driven by innovation, exports, and sustainability. Mr. Katz regularly advises federal, state, regional, and municipal leaders on policy reforms that advance the competitiveness of metropolitan areas throughout the country. He counsels on shifting demographic and market trends, as well as on policies critical to metropolitan prosperity, innovation, human capital, infrastructure, and housing, and new forms of metropolitan governments. Please join me in welcoming Bruce Katz.
Appreciate it. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank Mark for that introduction. Really enjoyed John's comments. I want to thank Bob and the Chamber for inviting me here. It is wonderful to be back in San Francisco. And I think really what I'm going to describe with the rise of innovation districts is something which is a remarkable shift in the geography of innovation that you're really at the epicenter of. So let's talk about the big market and demographic dynamics that is changing where innovation occurs. If you go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, what we had in parts of this state, obviously our Midwest and New England, parts of Northern Europe, were industrial districts, where manufacturing companies came together, really enmeshed in the urban fabric to begin the drive towards mass production. Post-World War II, what we built here, obviously, in Silicon Valley, Research Triangle Park and Raleigh-Durham, were science parks, so suburban corridors. And the geography and the physical layout were spatially isolated campuses. This is sort of a post-Cold War phenomenon where companies were trying to do their innovation in secret, right, within the four walls of their firm and not really interact with the broader environs. What we're now seeing is something radically different. And we're seeing it here, we're seeing it all throughout Europe, and we're seeing it at a nascent level in other parts of the world. It's the concentration and agglomeration of advanced research institutions, of medical campuses, of large companies with R&D, but beginning to interact with small and medium-sized enterprises and in an urban environment. Mixed-use development, residential, retail, amenities, transit, all sort of mashed up in this new geography of innovation. What's going on? We are changing from a closed innovation model, again, keep your secret secret, to an open innovation model. And when you move to open innovation, and when you have large companies basically wanting their workers to interact with talented workers in innovative firms to speed the level of innovation, you crave proximity and you crave density. This was Pfizer's headquarters outside of Ann Arbor for a long period of time. Like many pharmaceuticals, they invented their discoveries, their drug discoveries, inside the firm. This is where Pfizer is today. Kendall Square, Cambridge. Why are they there? MIT. Money, ideas, talent, right? That's what it stands for. But that's where, but many pharmaceuticals and many companies in other sectors are gravitating back, as we'll talk about, near the anchor institutions. Then you have demographic transformation. And there are many disruptive demographic transitions underway. Obviously, we have the aging of our society, altered family structure. We saw this really in many of John's slides. Married couples with children representing under 20% of our households. Well, that's going to change consumption. That's going to change preferences for where people want to live, work, and play. Older Americans also beginning to tell the real estate market what they want. And what they want is, again, to be enmeshed in an urban kind of fabric. It doesn't need to be in a city. It could be in a suburban community that's reorganizing itself. And then, of course, the millennials and really the vote with their feet for really central city living and access to work and access to so many of the amenities. This is also part of the innovation district phenomenon. People don't want to drive 30 miles out to a corporate campus and spend their whole day and then find themselves at lunchtime going down into the basement to the cafeteria. They really want the access and the environment that's much broader. Now you put all that together and what you have is a demand for cities, yes, but also for cityness. What does a city mean? It means density. It means diversity. It means choice. It means amenities. That's what's happening here. It's this collision and juxtaposition of big market forces and the penchant for open innovation meeting demographic transformation. So listen to this.
The geography of innovation is shifting. To find an innovative economy 20 years ago, a worker needed to drive to a secluded research park, work in isolation, and keep ideas secret. Today, proximity is everything. Workers want to be in urban places that are walkable, bikeable, hyper-caffeinated, where they can bump into other workers and share ideas. Firms also want to be close to other firms, research labs, and universities in collaborative spaces so that smart ideas can be turned into smart products for the market. Innovation districts are this century's productive geography. They are both competitive places and cool spaces, and they will transform your city and metropolis.
So as you could tell, I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons, but this is my way of communicating. So this is the definition, early stage definition, draft definition that we're using at Brookings. It is these small geographic areas, these really small enclaves where you're seeing the mixing and mashing up of these large institutions with small entrepreneurs, venture capital, but again, in this urban setting, right? And the reason why we need this is in part a response to some of the stats that John showed. And Enrico Moretti, I understand, was here last year. When you supercharge your innovation economy, when you have growth in the STEM occupations, science, technology, engineering, and math, there is a multiplier effect. There is a leveraging effect because jobs are created to serve those STEM occupations, but then it sort of radiates out into secondary and tertiary jobs. This is really, really important for the United States, given the sort of economic restructuring that John talked about. So where is this happening? We see really three kinds of districts emerging in the United States, and you have all three in the Bay Area. The first is really close to anchor institutions, whether advanced research, whether they're medical campuses, or whether they're large companies with large R&D. The second, which is really interesting and is mostly happening in hot markets like here or San Francisco or Seattle, is in areas that were older industrial. They're along waterfronts. They had a different purpose in the past that is now being reimagined and remade for innovation. And the third, and this is how you know this is really happening, are places that are further out from the central core. They could be science parks, they could be suburban corridors. They are urbanizing, not just because they like to do that, because they're feeling the competition from back in the central core. So where do we see this in the United States? The anchor institutions, obviously Kendall Square near MIT, Philadelphia University, think University of Pennsylvania, think Drexel, think University City Science Center, St. Louis, Washington University. But do a mental map in your mind of all the advanced research institutions in the United States we have. A lot of companies, big, small, medium, want to be near them because that's the secret sauce, the talent and the ideas. Where are we reimagining some of our older urban lands? We're doing it in these hot markets. Seattle, South Lake Union, phenomenal growth near the downtown. The Brooklyn Navy Yard, repurposed for multiple uses, including some of the existing purposes. And then the Boston Seaport, really almost a relief valve to the sort of growth in Cambridge. And we'll come back to that as we begin to talk about Hunters Point and Shipyard. And then Research Triangle Park, the iconic science park, beginning to urbanize so that it can compete for talented workers and innovative firms with downtown Durham, with downtown Raleigh, with Chapel Hill, and then you see University of Arizona and University of Virginia. This is a global phenomenon. Frankly, the Europeans started this in a deliberate way, in a purposeful way before we did. Barcelona actually named an innovation district off their major downtown. The question is whether the United States can leverage it even further. Let's deconstruct these districts because some really interesting things are happening within them. What you really see is the confluence of three kinds of assets coming together: economic assets, physical assets, and networking assets. And when you have a risk-taking culture like we do, and an entrepreneurial culture like we do, you create these broader innovation ecosystems. Let's start with the economic assets, and I'll just mention really one of the most critical ones: our anchor institutions, our universities, our medical campuses. This is Drexel in Philadelphia. With large investments in basic science and applied research, they are a platform for the commercialization of ideas. What then happens are companies in different kinds of sectors want to be located close to the mothership. High-value research-oriented firms. This is a firm called Cofactor Genomics in St. Louis, needs to be near Washington University. This is a firm specializing in video games in a creative field, needs to be near Drexel in Philadelphia. And this is in the Boston Seaport. That robot is called Artie. The firm is called Artaic. It's making mosaics, large mosaics for convention centers and hotels. You go into this small company, there's maybe 10 graphic designers, you have your robot, and then in the back you've got your logistics and marketing. That's the small batch manufacturing, very customized, that is beginning to emerge in these districts as well. So it's a certain kind of economy that is seeking this kind of enclave, right? And as you think about San Francisco and the broader Bay Area, you can almost survey the kind of companies that are moving to these places. Physical assets. The physical assets is, in many respects, what we love about cities, right? This is Barcelona, this is Detroit, this is Eindhoven in Holland, considered to be one of the most innovative cities in the world. They're looking to create public spaces, meeting spaces, communal spaces, really in the heart of these districts. So there are places for people to convene, hopefully on a sunny day. This is the inside of a co-working space in St. Louis, because what you're seeing is not just the public spaces being reimagined for innovation, but private spaces being reimagined. So collaboration between entrepreneurs and smaller firms happens as a matter of course. In St. Louis, in Cambridge, when they talk about particularly the life science sector, this is a place where researchers share infrastructure, very expensive equipment, because the notion is let the scientists focus on the science, right? And we'll give them the sort of environment that they need to succeed. This is District Hall in the Boston Seaport, another public-private space. It's really built off of the growth of real estate values, of developers to get the kind of height possibilities within the Seaport. This is the kind of concession they made. Again, a meeting place, there's a restaurant in there, but it's a place for collisions to happen, whether choreographed with program or whether just serendipity. And this is the kind of large infrastructure changes that are happening. Stockholm Life, Stockholm is a major advanced city, innovative city. On the left, you see what it looks like now. Like most American cities, we blew our freeways right through the heart of the city, right? We weren't really thinking about density. We really weren't thinking about connectivity in a 21st century way. These are their plans for Stockholm Life 2025. Deck over the freeway, right? And begin to knit and restitch the city back together for these larger innovative purposes. Finally, networking assets. Networking assets are really critical. I mean, it's really the heart of innovation when you think about it, whether it's happening within a firm, whether it's happening within a cluster, whether it's happening across a cluster. There's really two kinds of networking assets. The first really relate to strong ties. These are people, and this is Eindhoven again in Holland. These are people who really come from the same discipline. They have the same background. They have the same educational expertise. They may even have the same professional experience. They're beginning to connect to each other in very programmed ways in these districts to crack the code on a tough technological problem. But what's really interesting about innovation districts are weak ties. Lawyers, architects, investors, engaging with engineers, engaging with the techies, right? So you have a broader sort of mashup of experience and expertise, and new solutions begin to emerge around tough technical problems. So you put all those three together and something magic happens. And again, this is radical departure from how we thought about the geography of innovation in the United States. We did not really think about how economic innovation engaged in any sophisticated way with the physical environment, and then in a more programmed way, deliberate way with networking. Let's look at Mission Bay really quickly, because here you see it all come together. It's not a very large geography, but what you saw first, 20 or 3 or so, University of California, San Francisco, comes in, establishes its anchor base. I mean, one thing about anchors is they can be unanchored, right? They don't have to be in the same place ad infinitum. They can move around to have the largest return on investment. And then you begin to see the build out of other economic assets. California Institute for Regenerative Medicine coming in around 2004, and these other institutes and companies following thereafter. You then see the transit, the infrastructure, the connectivity, both with Caltran and the local transit, very, very important. And then you see with the California Institute for Quantitative Biosciences, the co-working spaces, the collaborative spaces, places where people from different firms, different disciplines can come together and create the 2 + 2 = 5 effect, which is really what happens in these districts. So that's basically bringing these economic, physical, and networking assets to one place. And then because of the prices here, both the housing prices, but the prices for commercial real estate, this is Hunters Point and Shipyard, which is really not that far away, but it's the last big piece of redevelopable property within San Francisco. But you can imagine how both what's happening in Mission Bay or what's happening in Market Street or other portions of this region can find a place within Hunters Point and the Shipyard, and we'll talk about that later. So how do you create an innovation district, or how do you take what you already have and leverage it up even further? Again, we're the epicenter of this in San Francisco, so this is not about starting from scratch. The first thing to think about is networks, because innovation districts, like cities, are networks. They're not government. They're not really one entity that controls everything by itself, siloed and compartmentalized. So if you think about these different examples, the networks that have been drawn and pulled together are very different from each other. In Boston, in the waterfront, that really was Mayor Menino recognizing that Cambridge needed an escape valve. And so he was able to really pull together a lot of different stakeholders from the real estate sector, from the life sciences cluster to supercharge that. University City, Philadelphia, it is this consortium of research institutions. UPenn Drexel, only 2 of 31 research institutions. That really is the heart of that build out. And in Raleigh-Durham, it's a nonprofit foundation that controls the park, but working very closely with the companies, working very closely with government because of the transit need to connect the science park to other parts of Raleigh-Durham. They're basically imagining a park for the 21st century. Second piece is, what's your vision? These innovation districts may have the same kind of assets, but what they do, the part of the economy that they concentrate in, is highly different. So this is really following the great advice of Dolly Parton, right? Figure out who you are and do it on purpose. She did not know she was talking about innovation districts, but so I think, as you're thinking about, your challenge here in San Francisco, in the broader Bay Area, Boston is probably the best case for a place that realized they had a stake, they had a foundation in multiple areas of the economy, but they needed to think about the unifying effect, the amplifying effect of Kendall Square, Seaport, and frankly, beyond. Because we could blow this out to the broader Boston metropolis, see Route 128, see other municipalities like Somerville beginning to play in this broader innovation economy. But thinking about how your separate districts interplay with each other, interact with each other, both through sectors, through connectivity, through skills, because so much of this is about bringing more people into this economy is critical. And once you have your vision, you can then really focus on these strategies for success. Depending where your starting point is, you'll choose different strategies. In Seattle, there was an enormous focus really in South Lake Union to attract into South Lake Union talent and firms bursting with talent like Amazon. But frankly, a lot of it was around the technological solutions, the power sourcing that they could really build that out. In Detroit, it's about capital. I mean, Detroit literally is a city without a government. The bankruptcy trial will be over, it'll be a big reset. But their innovation districts in the downtown and the midtown of Detroit, building off of Wayne State, Henry Ford Health, Detroit Medical Campus, Shinola, was really all fueled by local corporate and civic capital, deployed and channeled in very strategic ways. In some ways, Detroit was so far down, they had to invent a completely different method for pooling capital that I think could be really interesting to San Francisco. And finally, inclusion and equity. If we're smart about this, because this is happening in cities, this is happening literally a 2 or 3 block walk from low-income housing or public housing neighborhoods or low-income neighborhoods. If we're smart about this, then these will be innovation neighborhoods and not just innovation districts. We can do that through skilling. We could do that through smart neighborhood regeneration. We could do that through hyper-internet connectivity. We can do that in many different ways with many different stakeholders. So this is not just about the innovation economy that sits somewhere else and then gives us a bunch of gadgets that we all use, right? This is really about lifting a much broader segment of the population along. So that's innovation districts. I think all we've done at Brookings is basically capture a phenomenon. It's not like we came up with a government program like empowerment zones and said, okay, here we're gonna go. Everyone should come up with their own sort of response to this. This is real, this is happening. The question is whether each of these places and then the broader cities and metropolitan areas can realize their full potential and unleash the power of these places for broader inclusive growth. So I'm going to stop there, and then we have a great panel coming up, but first I'll take some questions. Thank you very much.
How do you protect intellectual property in multi-company innovation districts?
Well, I see this happening in some really interesting ways because if you go to Louisville right now, General Electric has opened up sort of a hacker space, a maker space, where small companies, entrepreneurs, tinkerers are coming in, and there are special arrangements they have around royalties so that if the product innovation that occurs out of that, both the entrepreneur and the larger company can basically share this. I think what you're just going to have is a whole bunch of innovative arrangements that now begin to emerge in this space. But you go to any of these innovation districts where you're seeing in the pharmaceutical space, the manufacturing space, the energy space, my sense is they're sorting it out. It'll differ from place to place depending on the nature of the sector or the nature of the collaboration.
Great. How do you replicate innovation ecosystems in non-major metropolitan areas?
Well, I think, first of all, this is happening in both large and medium-sized metropolitan areas, first and foremost. So St. Louis, Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh for sure, Providence. I mean, I could take you around the country and literally point you to where this is happening because all these places built these great advanced research institutions and medical campuses, and frankly, up to now, they didn't leverage them for their full effect. In terms of non-metropolitan areas, look, we have integrated economies, particularly within states. So the question for a state like California, just to choose a random state, is whether you're thinking about Central Valley, let's say, and you're thinking about food science and nutrition and how that relates to some of the great universities that sit outside Sacramento. So I think there's some possibilities there for sort of connections between the metropolitan areas and the non-metropolitan areas, either around energy or around food production. But it has to be about innovation. This is not just about traditional shipping, transport, logistics, the supply chain that we already have. This is something different. And I do think in a state like this, you might be able to be at the cutting edge of that integration.
Great. How do San Francisco's innovation districts fit within the broader market dynamics of this region, considering rising housing rents, cost of housing, of course, prices, competition with Silicon Valley, as well as cultural inequality controversies?
Well, I mean, what you're seeing is, you're like, the epicenter of the shift, right? Because you see it with individual companies, within companies, you see it within clusters. There's a drift up from Silicon Valley because a portion of the workforce is demanding a different work environment and a different living environment. So that's the phenomenon that's happening, here. Now, what are the threats to this? The threats are housing prices and housing unaffordability. The threats are rising prices in the commercial sector. Small and medium-sized enterprises get sort of pushed out. The threats are infrastructure, right? In fact, in many of these places, the transit infrastructure is not sufficient, whether it's bus, whether it's subway, whether it's light rail, to support what is a much larger growing demand for urban living. So, and that's an underinvested asset. So the threats are clear. I would say the only difference going back to the Metropolitan Revolution is the solutions to this either largely are at the local level because of land use and zoning policy, which are critical to a large portion of this, or because the federal government has essentially left the building and is not really engaging on many of these issues in any deliberate or purposeful way. So this is the level, the city level, the multi-municipal level, the metropolitan level, at which you're going to have to sort this out. If you don't sort it out, you will be punished to some extent. It is a grand competition. And when I go around the United States and I talk to different places, they are actively thinking about how does our innovation district compete with San Francisco or Mission Bay or Kendall Square. They may not have the rich reservoir of assets you have, but they also don't have the affordability challenges and the infrastructure challenges.
We have many questions, Bruce, but this is going to be the last one,
Sure.
and then we'll move to the panel. As you know, and many in San Francisco have deep concerns that the benefits of our growing innovation economy are only accruing to a limited few. As the shipyard and perhaps other innovation enclaves districts grow in the city, how can this ensure that they open up opportunities for a broader group of citizens and neighborhoods? Are there good examples for around the country or cities that have responded to this issue?
So I think that's a great question. I frankly think it's the central question, not just for this city, not just for this metro, but for the nation as a whole. How do we have inclusive growth in the United States? Because we saw John's charts. I think we have to redefine what the tech economy is, and we have to redefine what the STEM economy is. Because I think for too long we've defined it in very, very narrow terms. The tech economy just defined as a series of gadgets that we mostly use to communicate with each other, to access information. It's a very narrow sort of definition of technology. 50 years ago, when I was a kid, if someone asked me, what does technology mean? It means going to the moon. It means aviation. It means any number of things. So we've redefined technology, we've defined it down, and we've defined STEM as something that is only accessible to people with the highest levels of education, whether they're coming out of Stanford, whether they're coming out of MIT, or whether they're coming out of these other universities. We've looked at STEM, and we think that about 40% of the jobs can accrue to people with sub-baccalaureate education. That means they're going to high schools that are teaching computer science and other technical skills, or they're going to our great community colleges, which are also giving them customized skills training so they can move into this broad sector. Once you think about it that way, and going back to Enrico Moretti's observations, we should be building up a parallel system for upgrading the education and skills of our young adults in many of these areas of deprivation, neighborhoods of deprivation, so that as these innovation districts arise, we can see the job effect shared more broadly, which then has reverberating effects because of the wages of people in these occupations on housing on a much broader piece. Frankly, by separating housing from the economy, transportation from the economy, the way the federal government thinks about things, everything is just a separate department. By integrating these at the local level, I think we can begin to really crack at these broader social divides in our country. It won't solve everything. It will not hire the least employable people in our society. But when you think about the jobs that will be generated by this innovation boom, a much broader segment of our society can benefit.